Welcome to the Prolific Pulse Poetry Podcast. This is your host, Lisa Tomey Zonneveld. Today, we're happy to welcome Lynne Thompson. The adopted daughter of Caribbean immigrants, Lynne Thompson was Los Angeles 2021 to 22 Poet Laureate and received a Poet Laureate Fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. She's the author of 3 previous collections of poetry, Beg No Pardon, Start with a Small Guitar, and Fretwork, winner of the 2019 Marsh Poetry Prize. Thompson is the recipient of multiple awards, including an Individual Artist Fellowship in the city of Los Angeles, Tucson Literary Festival Poetry Prize, the Stephen Dunn Poetry Prize, the George Drury Prize, as well as fellowships from the Summer Literary Series, Kenya, and the Vermont Studio Center. An attorney by training with the JD from Southwestern Law School, Thompson sits on the boards of Canem, the Poetry Foundation, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. In June 2022, she completed her 4-year service as chair of the Board of Trustees at Scripps College, her alma mater. Thompson's recent work can be found or is forthcoming in the literary journals Best American Poetry, Kenyon Review, the Common, Pleiades, the Massachusetts Review, and Copper Nickel, among others. So welcome, Lynne Thompson. It's so wonderful to have you here with us today from sunny California to sunny North Carolina. So,
well, it's a delight to be with you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you. And I am going to share with everyone the picture of your book cover. We're going to be talking about this particular one. And okay, seems like it cut off part of it. There we go. Blue on a blue palette. Beautiful cover. Is there a story behind that cover?
There is a story behind that cover. I was really agonizing about what kind of image I wanted for the cover. I was pretty sure I didn't want any people or anything like that, but I wasn't sure exactly what I did want. And I was in New York with my niece, Livia, and we were walking into an art gallery, and Livia saw the piece first and said, "Oh, Auntie Lynne, doesn't that look like the right kind of art for your cover of your book?" And I just immediately fell in love with it. It's fibers and pins, and the artist, Darlene Charnecko, who is a New Yorker, said that what she wanted people to take away from it was either that they were looking back at the earth from a drone or that they were looking through a microscope without defining what the observer was supposed to be seeing. And I really loved that idea. So that's how it came about. I wrote her cold, and she was so kind and so gracious and said, "Of course you can use it for your cover. I'm honored that you would ask." So it worked out well for all of us.
That's wonderful. I love it. As an artist myself, although I'm not in one that has anything in any galleries, but I really appreciate it. And when you look at it, it's like you can see different things.
Exactly.
You can analyze it to the nth degree and find so many different things in it. I love it. And
absolutely,
isn't that kind of like poetry?
Absolutely. What you think you have written about, I can't tell you the number of times I've been at a reading and I thought I was writing, let's say, about a horse, and someone would come up and say, "Oh, that the spirituality in that poem." And I'm thinking that wasn't where my head was, but that's what the listener took from it. So it's really a wonderful synergy between author and reader or listener.
Exactly. Now, speaking of the poetry, this particular book, and this is your 4th book, right?
That's correct.
Is this book unique in and of itself compared to the other 3, or are there any blendings going on in there?
Yeah,
an underlying theme, I guess.
Yeah, the first and third books were really more about family.
Mhm.
I'm an adoptee, and so I write a lot both about my birth family and the family that chose me and raised me. The second book was what a friend of mine calls my love, no love poems, mostly no love poems. But this book is really about the state of women, both personally on a broader scale, our joys, our frustrations, our rages, our sexuality, how we feel about aging, a variety of those issues. So it's thematic in that way, which is different than what I had been doing before.
That's exactly
Also,
what I've gotten out of it is the theme of women and to so many different levels and so many different degrees. Wow. I mean, it touches on so many different things. And as a woman who's going into that next phase of life, it's like I have lived a lot of these experiences in some way, either by personal or by observation of others. So,
correct, correct. You've got it exactly right. I'm so grateful that came through.
yeah, it's really kind of book that you would want to read over and over again, I believe.
Oh, that's music to my ears. I love it.
Well, that's my basis for if I purchase a poetry book, I'll, sometimes get one from the library or whatever, if I can get the library to have one. They don't have them very often. And it's like if I fall in love with it, then I have to add it to my collection. Um,
Absolutely.
my collection is falling over practically on the floor. I have so much. But yeah.
Mine is the same.
About how long of a process was that for you from when you started writing the poetry for this book to the publication?
Yeah, I would say these poems were written, the pandemic has tend to skew all of our senses of time,
Mhm.
but I would say that the poems were written over a 6-year period, 7-year period. I served as the Los Angeles Poet Laureate for 2021 and 2022. And while I was in that role, I wasn't really writing as much as I ordinarily would. But a friend said to me, Lynn, you should think about using this time. If you have some poems to compile into a collection, this would be a really good time for you to strike while you're holding this role and people are somewhat focused on your work. And so when I went back and looked at the poems, I said, well, I don't have a theme and I don't complain, complain, complain. But when I went back and looked at the poems, I realized that they were about women, that the color blue seemed to appear more frequently than I had realized, and also that they were a little bit more experimental than I had written in the past. And I wanted to use that sense of experimentation to talk about to be a metaphor for all the different ways that women try to make sense of their lives, to be the best that they can be, et cetera, et cetera. So it all kind of gelled. And I think, but for this friend making the suggestion, I might not have looked at them in that way,
Mhm.
but decided to do so. And blue is the output.
Well, what a wonderful result. So being poet laureate may have actually helped you in your personal goals of getting this book accomplished. So
Absolutely.
congratulations for that role of poet laureate. That's no small potatoes. I mean, that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. I will forever be amazed that it happened, thrilled that it happened, proud that I was able to serve the city in that role, and just enjoyed it from beginning to end, even though it happened in the middle of the pandemic, which made it a challenge.
Yeah. I was the poet laureate for the Gardner Neuro Institute. I've been away from that role now for, I guess, about a year. And I also wondered, with that responsibility, was I going to have time to write? I think I wrote more.
Ah,
I started doing, providing activities, workshops, and different things
yes.
that
Yeah.
forced me to
Yes.
to do more writing. So
Absolutely. Well, I have so many scribbled ideas down from the workshops that I did during that time. That should be a whole nother book. So,
exactly. Maybe we should call it scribbles from the pandemic. But
right, right. Absolutely.
oh, wow. So now, presently, what kind of goals do you have with your poetry?
Well, right now, of course, I'm spending a lot of time promoting this book, but I do have some ideas in the back of my head about two projects that I'd like to work on. One concerns, or a question that I've always had in my head is, as we are in a time where more and more we're talking about monuments of different kinds, historical, religious, etc. What does any community keep or get rid of? Why and who makes those decisions? It really hit me again with two events. One was the burning of the I think like the largest museum, not museum, library in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
and what was lost in that and how they would replace it. And of course, the fire at Notre Dame in France, which has been, as I understand it, rebuilt and will be glorious in its reopening at the upcoming Olympics. But someone makes those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And why are they made and when are they made, particularly on smaller scales? Bigger scales, we know that there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. But even in a city, if they decide, well, that little mom and pop store that had particular architecture, we are going to put a glass building in its place. Why would you do that? And what does the community lose when you do that? So that's always been an interest of mine. And I also have some family stories that I want to explore a little bit more, some history.
It's even the connectedness between the family history and the history of these buildings. I could see that could actually be intertwined into poetry.
Absolutely, because we all know that there are family stories that get repeated and some that never do. Usually they come out at some point and people are shocked, either in a good way or a bad way. So yes, it's on the family level, we do that. And on a bigger level, we do that. On a more universal level, we do that.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really interesting as one who likes to dabble a little bit in history, and particularly like buildings fascinate me. Just totally.
Yes,
If I go to a big city, I'm looking at the architecture. I'm wondering what the story is behind certain things.
absolutely.
That's where my head goes. I mean, people get caught up in all the other little glittery things, but I'm like, I want to know about, why this particular building was designed this way and what was the story behind it.
Absolutely.
There is a lot of poetry in that.
There's a lot of poetry to be found there. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, so of course in Los Angeles, we have a very large, glorious baseball stadium, Dodger Stadium. But that stadium was built when a community of Mexican American citizens were literally booted out so that you could have this fabulous stadium. But you don't hear as often as I think we could the story of what happened there, how that spot was selected, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the types that I love, tying history to poetry. And those are the kinds of stories that I'm interested in.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'll definitely need to know when that comes out.
Well, it's going to be a while in the making, but that's what's noodling around in the back of my mind.
Well, you have me curious as well about your other books that you've written. I think I'm going to have to do some deep diving into your poetry because after reading this book, it's like I got to know more because I really like your writing style.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
I noticed that you don't particularly choose one or the other. It's not all like sonnets, or it's not, form of poetry. It's different, of a good variety of this, that, and I like it that way. That's the way I write. Maybe that's why.
Yes, yes. Now, for me, it keeps me interested. It shakes things up a little bit, and I think it replicates how our lives work. They're not all happy days or sad days, or it's a mixture of things. And so I really wanted the book, particularly when you talk about women, we're not only mothers and sisters and daughters, but we're ministers, we're scuba divers, we're travelers, we're a mix of things, and that manifests in different ways. So I was hoping that the the structure of the book in terms of the poems themselves would reflect those differences.
Yeah. Well, you did a wonderful, wonderful job with them. I am really
Thank you.
impressed.
Thank
I would
you.
love to hear your poetry. Would you like to share with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to share a poem. Since we're talking about family, I'll read this one. A birth mother wears a costume her daughter will never fit into. Some thought the woman said taproot. Some thought that woman said resigned, but her daughter mouthed immaculately conceived. Some thought the mother said perdition. Some thought she said hocus pocus, while her daughter wrote parables, wrote charms. Some hoped the daughter would say, yes, mummy, although they suspected the daughter said wishbone, knew she would deny everything, slipping into, out of. Some never understood her need to be alone, her fear of sorcery. They only knew her as braid of ginger and sea salt, as weightless darling and origami. Some have heard her bark and bark and bark. Some have heard her arrange a resistance.
Love it, love it, love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you tell about the publishing process since you've been published, 4 times now? How's that been
Yes,
for you?
and each one, well, maybe not each one, but each has their own story. The first book, of course, I knew nothing. I know a little bit more, but I really knew nothing. That book was published in 2007 by a press, Perugia Press, out of Massachusetts. I cannot celebrate this press more highly. First of all, they were attractive because they only publish women, with all apologies to my male counterparts. So I thought, this is fantastic. 50% of the population's out of the picture. I don't have to compete, with them. They publish one book a year of a woman. Not only do they promote that book during the year of its publication, but I can tell you to this day, they still support and promote all of their authors. My book came out in 2007. Perugia is talking about everything I'm doing now, even though they're no longer the publisher, because they only publish the first or second book of an individual. So you're not going to have a long publishing history with them. But it sent me off in such a positive way that I have to make sure that first publisher gets an extra shout out. The second book, Start with a Small Guitar, was published here by a small firm, small press here in Los Angeles, What Books Press. In addition to being a supportive and wonderful press, they have enlisted the art work of an artist here, Gronk, and he is a spectacular, and once you see his work, you know it whenever you see it again. And he very generously allows the authors to select whatever they want from his work for the cover of their book. So as a result, I have a fabulous cover there as well. The third book, Fretwork, was published with Marsh Press out of New York. They run a contest. I entered it specifically because the wonderful poet Jane Hirschfeld was the judge. And I just kept thinking, oh, how honored would I be if Jane selected my book? And she did. And so that was a wonderful experience. And then I started to be more, to really think about what I wanted in terms of a publisher with this book, Blue on a Blue Palette. And I wanted a small or a mid-size press, which had maybe a little bit greater distribution capabilities than the other presses that I had been with, had been a little bit more established. And Boa Editions was way at the top of my list. And I was just very fortunate that they loved the book and said, Lynne, we're going to publish you. And we were off to the races. It was the shortest of the processes that I had been through. Sent it to them. We love it. We're going to publish it. So that was I want to say maybe last August. and the book was published this April. So it moves pretty quickly.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's great. It's always good to hear. I like to hear, because I'm a publisher, and I like to hear good news about publishers. I like to
Yes.
hear the positives. I belong to a group that, you hear all of the different sides of the story, and it
Absolutely.
kind of makes me want to be the better one.
It's a tough business. And of course, as a publisher, you know that there was recently a distributor, SPD, that went out of business overnight and really sent the small presses into a tizzy because they had so much of the market and literally, as you know, shut down, as far as I can tell, without warning. And that's problematic. So kudos to all publishers, small, large, medium, because this is not an easy business as we're competing with Kindle and podcasts and Audible, and which are all great. But for those of us who like holding our books in our hands, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us all as writers, as publishers, as editors to figure out, okay, how do we navigate the new world and AI sitting on our shoulders?
Well, and I can say from looking at your book, your publisher also has a good conscience about the reading of the book. I mean, I'm reading it in the e-format right now.
Yes. Yes.
Although I'm going to be buying it, but I'm reading in the e-format right now, and it's really pleasant reading. I kind of a critic of that because, it's important to me to be able to see well when I'm on a Kindle or anything like that, to be able to read a book well that way. And often we'll buy a book both electronically and paperback, because I do like to hold a book and read it. And also, but sometimes the Kindle's better for my eyes to read.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you brought that up for your listeners, because when I first got the galleys, I said, isn't the print kind of large? And they said no. And they made the point that you just have. They said, as we go forward, a lot of people are reading in Kindle. And as he said, especially the younger readers, I say everyone's younger than I am, younger readers are used to being able to manipulate the size of the print. And they had found this middle ground in terms of this font that they were using. So initially I was a little resistant, but thinking about that has made me think, that's true. This is part of saying, how do we appeal to today's reader? As opposed to a reader, 40 years ago when they didn't have this access. Now we can do some different things. So I'm glad that you pointed that out for ease of reading, whether in book form, Kindle form, PDF, whatever. I do think that's a plus.
Right. Yeah, and even the selection of the font, like I have switched everything over to dyslexic friendly font. And
yes,
it's not that hard to come by.
Yes.
And it really makes a difference in reading the book. And I have, quite a few people that I know that have dyslexia. And so, I have them look at it to see what they think. And
Absolutely.
it helps
Absolutely.
immensely. And that's just another
Yes.
very simple way that we can reach out and
Make it accessible
people.
as broadly as possible. Absolutely.
We want everybody to read poetry, and the more accessible we make it, better, right?
I think that is absolutely true. Couldn't agree more.
Well, Lynne, is there anything you would like to share that I haven't asked you?
I've loved this conversation because it's gone in some directions that many don't usually go. I would just say, I guess a couple of things. To those of you who maybe started writing a little later in life or after an initial career, which is what happened to me. I practiced law for almost 15 years and then woke up one day and said, I think I'll be a poet now, to which my family said, you have got to be kidding me. And one of my brothers in particular said, don't you have a novel in you? And I said, yeah, no, I really think it's the poems, 40 lines, you're in, you're out, you're done. You can make that switch or do two things at once. It takes a little work, it takes a little dedication, might take a little longer than you had otherwise hoped, but it's attainable. So I just want to encourage your listeners, whether they're writers, readers, cooks, gardeners, are thinking, gee, I'd like to paint now, go for it. Just do it, because I think it will enhance your life in ways that are so soul meaningful. It'll make a big difference. So I guess that would be the message I'd want to share with your listeners.
Right. And I totally agree with you. If it's in you, you got to visit it.
You got to visit it. It will nag you until you say, okay, I'm doing it now.
One of my favorite poets is who also I've published a couple of her books, Van John. She went from working at the university in Colorado, and when she retired from there, she really got into her poetry and more as is writing, getting books published and that. And there's no going back to.
There's no going back. I can't imagine it not being part of my life. Yeah. The other day I had heard a finger on my right hand, which is my writing hand. And I was thinking, what would I do if I couldn't physically write? And I said, that's what they made tape recorders for. So, you just figure out a way to deal with it. So
exactly. You can talk to your computer now. I mean, you can open a Word doc and have it record your poetry for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a way it can be done.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Absolutely.
Well, Lynne, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I feel like we're just sitting here with coffee and just having a relaxing visit. It's too bad you're all the way in California.
I know. Well, if I ever make it back your way, I'm going to definitely look you up for sure.
Absolutely. I would really love that.
That would be terrific. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lynne. And you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You do the same.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.